Before we begin, I'd like to announce that Lights and Buttons has officially crossed the 1 million views mark. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for supporting this channel, and I really appreciate it. Back in 2019, I was in the market for a few new E-mount lenses because I was switching over from my Nikon over to the Sony camera system, and I wanted to start with 3 different lenses, 2 of which were primes, the 24 and the 85, and I wanted an all-purpose zoom lens to complement that. And this will be my first zoom lens for the E-mount system. I was looking at a couple of different lenses and decided to go with the Sony 24-105 lens. This is an f4 constant aperture zoom lens that doesn't lose light as you zoom in, which is pretty nice. It has optical image stabilization, and then also it has a pretty good lightweight setup so that you're not carrying a lens that's too heavy and bogging you down. But that was back in 2019. In this video, I have a few different questions that I want to address. Is this lens still relevant? Is this lens overrated? And then also, is this a good first lens to use all around if you're jumping into the Sony E-mount system? Around the Boston area, I brought along the Sony 24-105 lens that I was talking about, and then also a telephoto lens, the 70-180 from Tamron, just in case the 105 focal length isn't quite long enough. It was pretty sharp, very good quality, and didn't really have any problems with this lens other than it not being able to get some of the more distant shots, and that's when the 70-180 lens came in handy. So I used the Tamron for a bunch of shots, and I was really hoping that the 24-105 would kind of cover it all. But what I found out was I still needed a telephoto lens. I had an encounter with a family of geese, aka Cobra Chickens. And these things can get aggressive if you get too close with the babies, and I wasn't really comfortable using the 24-105 and relying more on the telephoto, and 105 being maybe a little bit too restrictive in that sense, but I ended up using the Tamron 70-180 to get some of these shots. So yeah, with the Tamron 70-180 lens, I was able to get some close-up shots, some of them even at f2.8 in broad daylight. Now you might be wondering, why isn't there a lens that is a 24-105 f2.8? Up until recently, my answer would have been, such a lens does not exist. A lens is very complex, and if you're adding a bigger focal length range and a very wide aperture, well, that just adds to the complexity and it makes it big and heavy. And camera manufacturers probably won't want to design something like that. But recently, Canon said, hold my beer, I'm going to design something like that for you. And they came out with the 24-105 f2.8L full frame zoom lens. This is the world's first 24-105 zoom lens that's an f2.8 aperture all the way through. And if you're interested, check it out. And again, the world's first full frame 24-105 f2.8 lens. Now, jumping back to the original set of questions, is this a good first lens? Well, I think it depends, right? If you need the 24-105 and you're comfortable with that range, and the 24-70 is a little bit too restrictive, maybe do consider this. If you have a camera body that doesn't have IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, this does have OSS, which is the optical steady shot feature that allows you to do optical stabilization. With a camera body that doesn't have it, and if your camera body does have it, like my Sony a7 III, this will work with that to stabilize your videos and photos. If you go with a 24-70 from Sigma, for example, they recently released the Mark II version of it that does not have built-in OSS, and you have to rely on your camera body to do the stabilization. This lens is kind of in the middle if you consider the Sigma 24-70 and the Sony 24-70 lenses. This is cheaper than the G Master, the Sony 24-70, but the Sigma version of that 24-70 is cheaper than this, and it does f2.8. So if you don't need the full 24-105 zoom range and you're okay stopping at 70 because you have something like this where you have a telephoto zoom that takes you from 70 to 180 or 70 to 200, then maybe the 24-70 lenses will be good for you. But that's up to you. You have to decide if that zoom range is right for you. The focusing speed is pretty quick, so I don't have any complaints over here. This should be pretty sufficient for most general photography and video. If you're photographing up close, you can bring the front of the lens down to about 7.5 inches away from the subject. It's not a macro lens, so you won't get the same quality as one. Overall, if the limitations that I've mentioned doesn't bother you, then yes, I would recommend this as a first lens for your camera or as a general travel lens. One other thing I didn't mention is that this is a full frame lens, meaning that if you were to have an APS-C body that you're pairing up to this lens, you would have to factor in a 1.5 times crop to your focal length. And even though the lens design isn't the newest, I think the lens is still relevant today given the benefits that it offers. Now, another question that could come up is this lens overrated? In my opinion, it is not overrated, even though it is a little bit more on the pricey side, but you get some features that you might not get with other lenses, such as the optical steady shot. But if you're considering third-party lenses such as Tamron and Sigma, they also make pretty decent lenses. For the Sony 24-105 lens, there are some physical features that may not be available in other lenses. For example, the button over here, if we take a closer look at the lens barrel, there's an autofocus, manual focus switch, there's an optical steady shot switch over here, and then there's also a button that's available. The feature that I use the most is the autofocus, manual focus switch because it allows me to switch between the two modes pretty easily. It's a dedicated switch, it's always in the same spot. It also allows me to avoid the menu system when switching between the two modes, and I don't have to reprogram a button just to swap to manual pretty quickly. I can just do it right from the lens. As a matter of fact, I wish all lenses have this, and if I recall, the 24-240 lens from Sony, which is an older lens, doesn't have this switch. You would have to either reprogram a button or do it through the camera's menu system, but this does have it and it's pretty nice. Ultimately, owning an interchangeable lens camera such as a mirrorless camera or a DSLR means that you get the flexibility of changing out your lenses, and that's where you get the most benefit from a camera system like this. So even though one may be tempted to say, hey, let's get one lens that does it all, it is really beneficial to be able to swap out lenses. That's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.